Hey everyone, it is time for our testing security and confidentiality training. This is a training that we offer to everyone that is a staff member at Mesquite High School, whether you normally serve in the capacity as a para in the office, in the classroom, you're an SRO, or even a security guard. If you're going to have to walk through a testing environment, we need to make sure that you've been trained on security and confidentiality and different procedures, that you have full knowledge of all the information that we provide. That means some of it you're going to have to take on your own and study and be able to understand that you're responsible for the information that is presented and information that is shared. And then you sign your oath, and that oath is good for this school year. If you happen to have started listening to this training video and you were a staff member who participated in December STAR EOC test administration last week, physically were with us, had a duty assigned to you, then you have already fulfilled your training obligations. If you have a question about that, just email me and I will be glad to verify whether you have completed or you need to complete this one. While this is going to be shared today, Monday, December 9th, it will not be due until Wednesday, December 18th. That gives you a week and a half to listen to my voice, look over all your materials, sign your oath, and get it turned into Miss Gary or my box in the main office, or to us in my office in L109, or with Miss Gary in the main L Hall office in the glassed area. All right, let's get started. So the folder that was shared has all of this information. We're just going to glance over some of it real quick, and then we're going to spend some time on the slide content. So when you open the folder, or it will direct you to all these things. So the slides, this is the top one. That's what we're going to click on in a second and go there. But I also want you to go ahead and see the manual was shared in an attachment a couple of weeks ago. It's also in here, so you can review the contents of the manual. Remember, training never takes the place of reading the manual. All of it is important. We're also going to highlight pages that you really need to make sure that you know and are can get to and have knowledge of. Checklist, just so you know, some people have done this for a long time. Some people are just new to us this year. Checklist keeps us all on the same page. It keeps us in compliance with law and policy of the state. Some people might have gotten a little bit comfortable. We may start changing these little dots over here to initial boxes because you need to have reviewed and taken care of each and every step that's on here. Something even occurred last week where one of these steps, if it had been reviewed, it would have been, we wouldn't have had to do an investigation. It's very clear that even kids forget what they're doing. They put their Chromebooks down. Sometimes they have stuff underneath them. Most of the time it's not intentional, but regardless, there's a thing that says lift up your Chromebook. Check and make sure there's nothing right here. Once, let me see. Before we actually start, it says, have them lift up the Chromebook, confirm there's nothing underneath it. The only thing that should be on their desk is their test ticket, scratch paper you provide when you provide it. That's why we don't do these things ahead of time. Kids can write all kinds of stuff if they're really wanting to. Anyway, there's things that we need to do, and there's things that we take care of. Your electronic policies in here, everything is in your checklist. And we even have one, this one's for the summer and fall. And then this one is for general. And these are the ones, the general is the one we use during the school year when it's mass testing. Summer and fall is when we used in those small times throughout the year. All right, let's move on to our training. So like we said, training never takes the place of reading the manual, and you can also go to the link for this manual right here. Let's make this a little bit bigger for all of us. All right, here's some new things for 24-25. Accessibility, all students taking Algebra 1 must be provided blank scratch paper. We've already doing this, and in your checklist, it does say to provide scratch paper every single star subject. So that's part of our policies. So failing to do that would be a procedural irregularity, because it's a procedure that we've adapted to the state requirements. And so everybody gets scratch paper. So there was a time that someone tried to tell me they can adamantly tell me that nothing in that room, in that stack was used. And I said, the only way you can do that is if you didn't give it out. So we have to provide the opportunity for scratch paper for each child. A lot of times they're not going to ask for it. So we need to do what is necessary and what's best for kids. Consolidation plans. Campus must create a consolidation plan and share it with our district testing coordinator. That's to say, after 4 or 5 hours, if it is possible to consolidate 4 or 5 hours testing. That doesn't mean from the time we started calling kids. It means from the time they've actually started testing. You don't count lunch times. You don't count any time but the actual testing times, and then we consolidate. We've already put those on file. We've had to have one in place every year, but now the state's requiring we file them with our district testing coordinator. That's already been done. There is a thing in Tide, which is where we house all of the information for testing. Those what's new for 24-25 doesn't really, that part doesn't really pertain to y'all, but I'm sharing this and adapted this training for our staff. This thing is kind of cool to me. 24-25 reporting dates. I often get the thing of when are the scores going to be back in? The state's made it really easy to read. If you've ever dropped in here and seen me look at this massive grid, that is the biggest piece of paper that they mail out and fold 6 times for us to look at throughout the year. This is the easy way to see when scores will be back. So preliminary assessment results for accountability, early student level results. So like the December test we just got through taking, it looks like everything will be in by January 10th. Some things will be in by January 8th. So if you're looking for a date, come back to your training or bookmark this page, and it's a really easy place. You can tell your kids, hey, you're going to be looking in your Skyward for a message from Miss Williams. I will send out general messages every time you have met the state score requirement or you have not met the state score requirement, and we'll be retesting. That's just some information for you to have, and it is very valuable, and I really appreciate this easy to look at thing. All right, here's some highlights things. Remember, it's a guide to test administration directions. It's a must read. These are pages in your manual and just an overview of what to look at that topic. It will really, really, really help you have knowledge of what's going on and why we do what we do, as well as policies and procedures you're required to know. Let's talk about that security and confidentiality. All right, so test security involves accounting for all the materials before, during, and after. And this is some of the things it involves. Being trained, so what we're doing now, signing your oath, that's part of the training. Paper materials are inventoried in Test Town. Those are for like Star Alt. And there are very rare occasions where a paper administration is used for other things. In fact, we don't have any of those approved by the state on our campus. I have to properly store those. That's why there's less than 5 keys for this office. It's a state law. I know that's kind of goofy, but we lock things up in cabinets and within this room. I have to track the chain of custody. All of these things, like our material control form, helps us to do that. So all of that is part of testing security. We also need to create a secure, positive environment for testing. We have to turn off the electronic devices. We have to have the environment can't help or hinder a kid. That's why we do room checks. That's why we have the MISD electronic device policy. Here's some more examples. And let's talk about room checks for just a half a second, maybe a little longer. When I put a thing out at the beginning of the year that say when approximately on the testing calendar, when we're going to have procedural training, when the tests are, you can guarantee there's going to be a room check in that time. And we can't wave people off. But what we are going to do is, if your room isn't ready, or you know you have some group activity that just cannot be replanned for the day that room checks are coming around, you will submit a form, and a copy of that will go to your appraiser. And then having your test room ready for testing as it needs to be, will be between you and your administrator, and that full responsibility will rely on you. We don't need to leave it for everybody that's coming to administer in the room. The responsibility lies on both the person whose room it is assigned in the regular time, as well as the person who is testing in that room. All right, let's look at irregularities. There's serious and procedural. There's two types. We kind of already talked about a procedural one, so let's start with serious. This is a violation of security or confidentiality. They have to be investigated by the district testing coordinator. So first you tell me, then I have to turn it over to her, and then she determines, oh, are we reporting this to TEA or not? A lot of times, if it's been something that I've had to turn over to her, probably 90% of the time it's also got to go to the state, but we'll see. They can result in the individual being referred to TEA for disciplinary action, and there are sometimes a charge can be pending. All right. It's conduct that violates the security and confidentiality of a test that is considered a serious testing irregularity. Some of these include directly or indirectly assisting students, tampering with student responses, viewing secure test content before, during, or after an assessment, specifically, unless you're specifically authorized to do so by procedures outlined in test administration manuals. For instance, we will ask you to make sure that a student has answered all their questions. They can click, click, click. You can look. All you're looking to see is if you see a dark bubble bubbled in, so that we know that their test, that it's gone through in the big mainframe in the sky and uploaded to the cloud and has all their answers. It also allows you on an English test, when you get to the ECR, you're not looking for their content, but if you see it looks predominantly blank, but maybe only a word or maybe just a period, kids do that as a placeholder to tell you they've answered the question. There is a direct phrase in the manual that says, you have not answered all your questions, please go back and do so now. That is covered. What is not covered is pausing for more than 2 seconds to glance on those pages and reviewing and trying to score in your mind how a kid did. Total violation. All right, discussing or disclosing the secure content of a student's responses, talking about it. I don't care if it's with a colleague or a parent, a kid, whoever, a physical being. You cannot talk about secure content. Duplicating, recording, electronically capturing. This is why the test never leaves the student. If something is going wonky with the computer, you get your assist. If your assist doesn't know, they get their lead. If the lead doesn't know, they get somebody from the testing office. But never, ever take a picture of the screen. Never, ever, ever bring the computer to me without the child carrying their computer to me and you escorting them. The test never leaves the student. All right, here's some continued things that it includes. Responding to their test questions. Voice inflection when you're walking around, or if I'm going to coach my kids, if I change position, there's all kinds of things people have done. They're stupid. And I have to say that is not a good word, but don't do things that violate security and confidentiality. Anything to do with an unfair advantage or keeping a test from being equitable for all students, anyone in the school, or failing to report that activity, failing to implement procedures that prevent cheating, failing to implement procedures to prevent altering test documents by anyone other than the student. All of these things are things that are considered serious testing violations. Procedural. It's just like it sounds. They're way less severe, they're more common, and typically the result of monitoring deviations and testing. Monitored deviations in testing procedure. When you skim the checklist and you say, I've done all these things, but you really don't even know what the checklist says, you are probably going to have to fill out an irregularity report from you because you missed something. This is why we train. This is why we go over that checklist 17,000 times a year. That's why it's in these folders so you can review it. So procedural irregularities include accommodation errors. We give you accommodation pages. They're flagged. They're things that kids have to have routinely, independently, and effectively, so we put them in place. Accounting errors, eligibility errors. We don't test someone that should have tested. We test someone that shouldn't have tested. Monitoring errors, training errors. Those all are procedural irregularities. Here's some examples of that. Test administrator leaves the room. They didn't monitor. They reinforced test taking strategies. None of that can be done in test room. Didn't provide appropriate materials. Dictionaries and calculators are embedded, but we do allow some, about 3 to 5 paper dictionaries in the room, just in case a kid needs to touch and feel and look at one of those physically. We also have glossaries that are provided for our bilingual students for any test. So didn't prepare the environment. It's an irregularity. Did not use the test administrator manual and did not read the say directions to students. Didn't complete the seating chart. All of these things are on well, a lot of these things are on your checklist. That's why we have them. Didn't give students the correction amount. Did not give students the correction amount of time to complete the test. That should say correct. I did borrow that slideshow and we all found the typo together. Let's see if I can fix it before I send it out to y'all. Monitoring errors. Somebody didn't ensure kids were working independently. They didn't prevent students from using cell phones or electronic devices to take pictures, share, or send messages. I understand that there are a lot of things. This is why you tell a kid, okay, go through your whole person. If you have a smart anything other than the brain that God gave you, it needs to come off, be tagged, and go in the bucket. Smart watch, any kind of phone. There are some high-tech things around there. Earbuds, all the things. It's got to go in the bucket. It's got to be labeled. It's got to be turned off. Accommodation errors. The student was provided an unallowable accommodation, or they were provided accommodation they weren't approved for. That's why the accommodation pages that are attached to your roster, you are responsible to make sure that you have put those in place. A lot of them are embedded, but some of them are not, and you have to make sure that that's being handled and provided. We want it provided properly. We don't want it provided to someone that it shouldn't be. Training errors. Someone's permitted to administer a test, monitor a session, relieve someone, walk in a room, or be by without being trained or sign an oath. That's why our SROs, our security guards, our paras, every single person, administrators, ICs, SSCs, counselors, everyone on our staff has to be trained and sign an oath. It's an all state, everybody. All right, so here's some eligibility errors. A kid takes the wrong test. A kid has to have had the curriculum. Now, I had someone have me a little bit of a reteach session on this. We have to have given them opportunity for curriculum. If a student gets a 47 in a class, sometimes I personally feel like I could testify to the fact that they haven't had the curriculum. It could also testify to the fact that they've been absent 75% of the time. But if they have been here enough that they have had any inkling of curriculum, we've given the opportunity for curriculum, and we should be able to allow them to test. I will revisit that over and over with our district people because I don't want to do this incorrectly. But that's why students that are on a track to regain credit or maybe catch up with a class, they have to have a certain percentage of it correct before we can even entertain the idea of them testing. And it's important. They have to be eligible, and we also don't need to test someone that has already passed or has had an ART in place or special provision in place or an out-of-state credit for that class that correlates to an EOC. I don't want to test someone that shouldn't, and I don't want to fail to test someone that should be tested. Both of those are irregularities. That's why it takes a village, y'all. There's everybody. Accounting errors, misplacing someone's ticket, leaving the assessment open and visible, secure testing materials left unattended. You take your bucket, you keep your secure bucket with you, you sign back in your bucket. There's a whole system in place. Giving the kid the wrong ticket. All right, obviously y'all know students using electronic devices to capture, transmit, secure test content. It's a direct violation. It's serious violation. We have to do this whole investigation, and I don't like it. It's icky. If a kid doesn't turn in their phone and it goes off and we find them with it, not only can their test be invalidated, they get disciplined because they didn't turn their stuff in like they were asked to. And then we have to look through their stuff. We have to look and see what they posted last, who they talked to last. I don't want to know those things. And if they don't want me to know their business, then they need to follow the directions. All right, cell phone policy, here's a link to it. This little paragraph right here is on your checklist. We read it. It's also inside your folder. The checklist directs you when to read it. That's why we ask for kids to label their phones when they come in the room. It's why we ask again, hey, if you're found having this, it can invalidate your test. We have to investigate all the things. So we do our due diligence to make things equitable in the room and fair for everybody. And this is part of it. Okay. There are state codes that apply to violation of test security and confidentiality. There are penal codes, there are administrative codes, there are laws. There are things that you can get your certificate suspended, revoked. You can have charges. There's a lot of penalties that can come for violating test security and confidentiality. So let's just not put ourselves in that position. See down here? Offense under this can be a Class C misdemeanor. I'm not making this up. Here's some incidents that involve cheating and some directive as to what we do. We are required to actively monitor. It ensures that procedures and directions are being followed. It allows us to know that we are providing an equitable environment for all students. And all students are required to follow those procedures. They're even asked to sign their honor statement. But even though it's not required, students are still expected to follow the directions, even if they don't sign it. And then districts are required to have procedures in place. And that's when we tag team with our administrators for their district offices and try to prevent things like cell phone electronic use. But there's also procedures that we have to follow for investigations. If they are found to have participated in any activity that has been involved in cheating or attempting to cheat, their test will be invalidated. That includes if they have notes for a class that is somewhat linked at all in any way to the test they're taking. Any kind of outside information can be used as something that would hinder, harm, or help, and it will invalidate your score. Procedural testing regularity forms should be submitted only if the district coordinator determines that. That's the one for the district. When in doubt, you will fill it out for us. We have a campus regularity form. It's in every testing bucket. All right, and here's the thing, collecting information. Our form is in every bucket. This is where it comes from. You are going to fill it out to your knowledge. We've revised it a little bit because there was a part of it that said what can be done to prevent this in the future. Sometimes there is nothing you can do. And so now there's a little bit of rewording on that, because if there is something we can do, we need to maybe review our procedures and put something in place. Again, I know y'all can read. Test administrator training on test security and administration procedures is required at least once. That's why we do it once a year, and then we revisit some high points. I have to keep your oaths on file and the records of this training on file for 5 years. All right, dictionary policy. They're available to students only for English 1 and English 2. They're embedded. They are embedded in the test itself. Secure testing browser, no one is signed in. They go to apps, secure testing browser. They are embedded in the test, just like the calculator. However, like I said earlier, we are going to provide about 3 paper dictionaries per room in case a kid needs to physically have one in their hand and refer to it off and on. We'll share it in the room. There's also bilingual dictionaries / glossaries, or word-to-word translations that our EBs can have on any test. All right, let's talk about accommodations a little bit. Designated supports. Look at all these fun things. This mass part at the top, if it is seen to be routinely, independently, and effectively used for a student, I'll show you which entity can grant those. This bottom part has to be approved by TEA. We don't have any of these on our campus at this moment. Here's where who can give what. But remember, if it is not routinely, independently, and effectively used, it does not need to be given to a student, period. And not everything that is an accommodation is a testing accommodation. Know that, understand that. I do want to visit one thing. Calculation aids, those are embedded as well. There's no need to put those in as accommodation by an ARD committee or a 504 committee because they're already embedded and it is redundant. Things that are already provided for everyone are allowable for everyone. They don't need to be placed on there, but that's not the case for all grade levels. That's why it's seen on here. All of these things are clickable. You don't know what that is? Click it. See what it says about it. Okay, you have to be out of the slideshow view. Also, time limit. While we don't have a time test, we do account for the time that we are testing. I hope that makes sense. We consolidate after 4 to 5 hours of actual testing. We're not supposed to exceed 7. Excuse me, so sorry. We're not supposed to exceed 7 hours of actual testing. My consolidation plan is already on file. This is why the start-stop documentation, seating charts, start-stop sheet, all the room log, all the places that we're asking you to document, please document the time. All right, dates, rooms, test breakdowns, and duties. This was what we looked at for last week, but I wanted you to see kind of an outline. I do provide this every time we test. This is not pertaining to any of you because all this is in the past. But there's always teacher duties. There's always things. There's always possible duties. Everybody kind of always wants a duty they don't always have. I'm sorry, we will do the best we can, but we need everyone in place. All right, this was important to me. I wanted to leave this in here. This is an overview of what you'll find in your testing bid. Roster, start, stop, accommodation sheets are always stapled together. Then there's a packet that normally has your seating chart, your room log, your checklist, your headphones. I don't see checklist on here, but just because it's not in writing, I'm telling you it is there. All these things, whatever goes out, comes back in. Remember, electronic devices, they have to be kept on silent, and you are not supposed to be communicating or engaged in activity on the computer, on your phone. Neither are students. On occasion, we'll have to get word to you, but we're going to use assist and leads to do so the majority of the time. Even with attendance on mass testing days, we will still continue to do it online, but we're going to use leads and assist to help manage that so that it doesn't have you taken away from actively monitoring. Let's talk about actively monitoring. What is it? Why do we do it? Basically, all of it boils down to that bottom bullet point on the why. It ensures an equitable environment for all students. Act responsibly, ensure confidentiality, and provide proper administration, actively engaged in observing students' behavior at all times. Moving about the testing area so that students' actions can be served from multiple vantage points. That, I know walking around seems like a natural thing to people. It really just means station yourself at different places throughout the time testing. Don't make kids nervous, don't hover, but sit one place, stand one place, observe, take in. Just make sure everybody's on task and about the task at hand, not engaged in other activities. Not even a Sudoku. Here's some possible accommodations. Notice All these things down here online are embedded. Okay, supplemental aids on our campus, the only thing they don't exist for is US history. And for English, anybody that has a supplemental aid will be in certain testing rooms because it has to be used in only certain places on the test. A small group can be anything less than 30, but it should be relative to the way a student routinely tests. All right. And this is just an overview of these forms and what they do and why we use them. All right, guys, that's the end of the slide presentation and this training part. Remember, you're responsible for your manual. Make sure you look over those checklists. And then when you are ready, you have two things for your training to be complete. You have to submit this form that I'm about to show you, and you have to make sure that Estella or I have it completed it. Please do not check the boxes, initial the boxes. And if you are a non-certified staff member, whether you're a non-certified teacher or a para position, there is a special place that requires your initials as well. All right. I hope this season finds you well. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, or you can stop by L109 starting tomorrow. Thanks so much and have a great day.